I hope that you all enjoyed that opening weekend of baseball as much as I did. It was nice to have just something to watch throughout the weekend. Once again, I was washing my car on Saturday. Just had a baseball game on the radio. It was a lot of fun. So hopefully that went well for you, but also hopefully the DFS aspect went well also. A lot of runs scored over this weekend. There could see some more of the same tonight because we're getting into the thick of things because each team is now on their fourth starter, and that means it's getting harder and harder to find legitimate options for DFS. So today, our task is to dig through all the weeds, try to identify pitchers we think can get strikeouts with this slate, and utilize them as aggressively as we possibly can. Welcome on into the solo shot. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com, and of course, the FanDuel YouTube page as well. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, here to break down tonight's 10-game main slate with lock set for 6:05 p.m. Eastern. Yes, again, you did hear me correctly there. 6:05 p.m. Eastern. They looped in, I think it was 3 additional games by having lock be an hour earlier. Now, that could seem like an obstacle to overcome because we have to reset our minds about the timing of these things. But the final game starts at 7:35, which means we should have all lineups by 4:30. This is honestly like my dream scenario for DFS. If we could know the lineups at 9 a.m. and we could just set lineups throughout the day, cool. I'm on board. But here we'll have an hour and a half between when the final lineup likely comes out and when lock occurs. So despite lock being earlier, still pretty much, at least in my eyes, a dream scenario for tonight. Looking at the weather here, it is 90 degrees for 3 separate games. And again, hot is good for hitting. And that is in Washington, D.C. for the Nationals and the Blue Jays, in Philadelphia for the Phillies and the Yankees, and in Boston for the Red Sox and the Mets. Make sure you bump up hitters in all 3 of those games. There is the potential for some rain in Cincinnati between the Cubs and the Reds. Looks like the game should start as scheduled, just might have issues later on. So they're probably going to play that game. Just a question of whether or not they finish it, I think, is the bigger question here. And then the big concern of the day is in Cleveland. They are hosting the White Sox for tonight. Looks like it'll be raining all day. So if you want to use players in that game, specifically pitchers, but again, I don't think the pitching options are all too enticing, I would make sure you keep tabs on that one if you plan on using players in that game, because that one is the one on this slate where I think it could get a little bit murky. So make sure you check back for our show this afternoon. Speaking of which, that is on the FanDuel YouTube page. It's on Twitch. I think it's on YouTube, Twitter. It's a lot of places. We are going through lineups as they come out, starting at 4 p.m. Eastern every day. And if you have questions, you can hit me up. I will be answering questions on those streams every weekday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And it will be especially pertinent today because we'll have most of the lineups in at that point. I can talk through value plays. If anyone random pops up, we can talk through their profile and stuff like that. So that's on YouTube at 4 p.m. today. As mentioned, the solo shot is now live on YouTube every weekday as well. That's at 9 a.m. Eastern. So just make sure you're subscribed to the FanDuel YouTube page to get all this goodness right as it goes up. And of course, all of our DFS podcasts still on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. I'll be doing a solo PGA podcast tomorrow because Brandon is on vacation. NASCAR podcast this week as well. So a lot of good stuff. Just make sure you are tuned in and subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Before we take a look at the pitching for tonight, for years, numberFire's premium subscription service has provided our users with expert analysis, survivor pool tools, and most importantly, the fantasy football draft kit, all for up to $49.99 a month. Now, as a way of saying thank you to our community for years of support, numberFire is rolling out a new premium package for just $9.99 a month that will provide you with all the sports betting and daily fantasy tools you need year-round. And the best part is that expert analysis, those survivor tools, and yes, even the draft kit are now free. I do rankings there, season-long rankings for football, as do JJ Zachariason and Brandon Gadula. Those are all free now. Make sure you check that out, numberFire.com, and check out the new and improved site and take advantage of the new premium package. All content totally free. Just go on over and check it out right now. Pitching preview for this, again, tricky Monday slate. Tyler Glasnow is the most expensive pitcher on FanDuel at $9,700, followed by John Lester at $8,600. Mike Foltynewicz is $8,000, and Aaron Savali. Jake Arrieta, Anibal Sanchez, and Jay Happ are the others at $7,000 or higher. So, yeah, kind of dicey. I think that when you're looking at this slate, you can realize really quickly why things might be tough from a pitching perspective. Now, the toughest guy to figure out on the slate is Tyler Glasnow at $9,700. Glasnow was late to report to summer camp because he did test positive for COVID-19. So that's pushed his timeline back, and that's probably why he's starting on day 4 for this Rays team. He threw 49 pitches back on July 14th. Then he went 3 innings last time out. So I'm not sure where you'd project the pitch count, and Glasnow's not either. He said he wasn't sure how long he would go, according to Neil Solondz of Rays Radio, and that could make you think we just want to avoid him. And on a normal slate, like if this were opening day, we would do so. But I still think there is a case to be made for him in tournaments. In cash games, I wouldn't touch Glasnow. In tournaments, I think you can make that case. The reasoning is that the strikeout rate for Glasnow is so high. It was at 33% last year before the injury shut him down. And it's hard to expect anybody on this slate to be anywhere near that. You can make the case for one guy, who we'll talk about in just one second, but that is literally it. And strikeouts matter a lot because you get 3 points for each. So even if Glasnow doesn't go that deep into the game, if he gets strikeouts, he can still score well enough for you to pay off in DFS. That's especially true on a slate where you don't expect a lot of really high pitching scores. So again, even if the length is not there, there's still a situation where Glasnow could be the highest scoring pitcher on the slate. So for tournaments, I'm still going to have some Glasnow in there despite my concerns around his pitch count. It could go poorly, but no pitcher on this slate is safe. So it makes it a lot easier to swallow the risk when that risk is apparent with literally everybody available. So Glasnow, not my top guy, but someone I am willing to use for tonight. Instead of Glasnow in cash, I am likely going to wind up using Joshua James instead. James is only $6,700. And like Glasnow, there are lots of question marks here. But there are a couple of things propping James up for me. The first is that he's facing the Mariners. Gotta like that. It's a pretty rough offense. They have an 88 WRC plus against righties based on their current active roster and what they did last year. You can find that over at fangraphs.com. 88 WRC plus, 31% hard hit rate, 26% strikeout rate. And that ain't great. And that gives James a big boost. And James does need it because he's certainly not without his flaws. He worked almost exclusively as a reliever last year. And in that time, James had a 13% walk rate. That's not great. But he also had a 38% strikeout rate and a 16.2% swing and strike rate. So lots of strikeouts, which is good for his upside, as we discussed with Tyler Glasnow. He's got a great matchup. James is at home. It's a good park for pitching, and it seems like he is fully stretched out. We could have concerns about this guy going from reliever to starter, but in his final inter-squad game, 82 pitches for Josh James. So I think that if we're setting betting lines on pitch counts, I'd put James above Glasnow by a pretty good amount. So to me, James, despite the legitimate concerns around his walks, his transition to the rotation, I think he is the best pitcher available for tonight's slate. He's only $6,700, so plenty of salary to splurge on hitters, and I am very okay taking this dive. Again, there is not a lot of safety on the slate anywhere. We're going to be stacking against one of the more prominent names on this slate. So I think to me, it's okay to take that risk, go with Joshua James, see what happens, because I think the ceiling is there for him to be a really good pitcher from a DFS perspective. If we're ranking out the pitchers for tonight, I'd probably put Glasnow second on my list behind Joshua James. And the third pitcher to me is Adrian Hauser. And it probably feels weird to have Hauser and James near the top of this list. But this is a weird year, and these are each team's 4 starters. So let's embrace that weird and just go with Adrian Hauser. Hauser bounced back and forth between the rotation and the bullpen last year. But from July 30th on, he was strictly a starter. And he pitched really well in that time. Hauser had a 3.73 skill interactive ERA, and that's in those starts with a 27% strikeout rate and a 33% hard hit rate. Now, Hauser did that while not always pitching super deep into games. He never topped 100 pitches. He was around 70 or so for his final 5 starts. But most guys on this slate are going to have pitch count concerns this first trip through the rotation. And Hauser did go 77 pitches in his final tune-up before the regular season. So his length is less concerning now than it will be at any other time during the season. He's about on par with most pitchers from a stretch-out perspective when you look at those 77 pitches he threw in his final tune-up. And like Joshua James, Hauser gets a great matchup. He is facing the Pirates. They're not a huge strikeout team, but They're also not a great offense, just a 94 WRC plus against righties, 34% hard hit rate, and a 33% fly ball rate. And the strikeout rate on the Pirates and the length concern are why I favor James over Hauser. But Hauser is more proven as a starter, and he's also just $6,000. So whether you use Hauser or James, you got a lot of salary to use on hitters. I think that, again, I'm going to put Hauser third behind Glasnow and behind James, but I think he's worthy of consideration despite the concerns. If this were mid-August and everyone was stretched out, probably wouldn't be going at Adrian Hauser in the situation. But I think with everyone being kind of iffy from a pitch count perspective, we can afford to go with guys who are good when they are out there. And Hauser last year was that. So I think I will be going there today as my number 3 pitcher behind James and Glasnow in that order. So with the pitchers we're using for tonight, we got a lot of salary to use on stacks, so let's do exactly that. And unfortunately, go to a team that doesn't actually require us to use a lot of that salary, but it does allow us to get the top-end bats. That's the New York Mets, because I think the first couple of days of the season have proven that the Boston Red Sox are going to be involved in high-scoring games on both sides for this entire season. So no matter what they do with their pitching situation, I kind of think we should stack against them, and today that means stacking the New York Mets. It sounds like Zach Godley is going to be the bulk pitcher for today, coming in after Josh Osich. Godley has been discussed plenty of times here on the Solo Shot, usually in a positive light. Back when he was with the Diamondbacks, he had that big breakout year. We used him a lot then. Things have not gone as well since that time. As a starter last year, Godley had a 5.82 xFIP with a 16% strikeout rate and a 12% walk rate. He did still get the ground balls, and those were part of the reason he was so good as a starter that one year, but he also allowed a 43% hard hit rate. So that's a double concern. You know, the strikeouts are down, the walks are down, but if he were still limiting hard contact, we could be okay. That hasn't been the case. So as much as I love Godley, I think that it is a good chance to stack against him for tonight. But this team's pitching staff is kind of just a disaster. So no matter what, I think the Mets are the ideal route for tonight's slate. And again, we don't really need to find salary savers, but Yoenis Cespedes is $2,600, likely going to bat in the middle part of the order, and he's been striking out quite a bit to open in the year, but he's also making some loud contact. So I'm in on that. Jeff McNeil and Michael Conforto, really good mid-range plays. Everybody here, top-tier option. Obviously, you can afford Pete Alonso pretty easily, so I think the Mets are my favorite stacking option for tonight, even though we don't need them to be as cheap as they are. So with Godley, we have an opener followed by a bulk guy. We got a kind of similar situation out in Pittsburgh, and it sounds like the Pirates are going to use Steven Brault and Chad Kuhl as piggyback pitchers. That may be a term I use more than I ever expected to this year. But basically what that means is they're going to have Brault in first, Kuhl second, and they might not work as like an opener bulk guy, but more like each guy gets 3 or so innings effectively working out that way. Neither Brault nor Kuhl is someone we should avoid, which pushes us towards stacking the Milwaukee Brewers here. Brault last year, as both a reliever and a starter, had a 5.10 skill interactive ERA with a 20% strikeout rate and a 38% hard hit rate. Kuhl missed all of last year with Tommy John surgery, so no data from him last year. But back in 2018, the ground ball rate was super low, and he wasn't a big strikeout guy. So if it were Brault as a full-end starter, we could stack against him. If it were Kuhl as a full-end starter, we could stack against him. So I think it makes sense to go with the Brewers for tonight. The complication here is that these two guys are of different handedness. So what we want to do within our stacks is make sure we are targeting batters who can hit both righties and lefties. Obviously, Christian Yelich on that list. He's a lefty. He can hit lefties. Does not matter. He's $4,400. I can afford him for tonight. I'm going to use Christian Yelich in DFS on Monday. Bold statements here on the Solo Shop. But Keston Hiura is $3,300. Justin Smoke is $2,700. Ryan Braun fits this scenario as well. He is $3,000. So I think you're going to be able to fit Yelich pretty easily today with the pitching options, and I would love to take advantage of that and lock him in. But again, the key for the Brewers when you're stacking them for today is make sure you are utilizing hitters who can hit both lefties and righties, given the Brault Kuhl piggyback situation for tonight. Now, that still means we have a lot of salary to use on our hitters. Yes, Yelich is expensive, but outside of that, Alonso is the most expensive guy we discussed, and he's $3,600. So we got some salary to dump. I think I want to dump that salary on the New York Yankees. They're facing Jake Arrieta, and as mentioned, he's one of the bigger name pitchers on this slate. And Arrieta, at least based on last year's numbers, is not the pitcher he once was. If you look at him last year for the full season, Arrieta had a 4.64 ERA with a 4.82 skill interactive ERA. His strikeout rate was down to 19% with a 38% hard hit rate. And in order to combat that hard hit rate, which was far beyond what it usually had been for him, he tried to lean on his sinker more often down the stretch. But the hard hit rate was still the same, and his strikeout rate went down even more. So I would not be shocked if he goes against those adjustments as we get set for 2020. But even then, even before that change, things weren't going so hot for Arrieta. And this Yankees offense can obliterate righties, a 118 WRC plus with a 39% hard hit rate. And this game is in Philadelphia. It is a good park for dingers. It is one of the parks we mentioned that has a higher temperature for tonight. So Arrieta could snap back into place. That is within the range of outcomes. But if we get the same guy we saw last year, this Yankees lineup could jump all over him, and I think that it makes sense to go at them once again for tonight. The one issue with the Yankees, and the reason they are third on this list rather than being ahead of the Mets or ahead of the Brewers, is that Arrieta is a guy where you definitely want to target lefties against him, and the Yankees are a very righty-heavy lineup. So when you get guys like Aaron Hicks, Brett Gardner, Mike Tauchman, if you get any of them in a really good spot in the order, I want to go really hard at those guys because they could really pummel a guy like Jake Arrieta. I'd expect Hicks to bat probably fifth or so tonight. That's pretty awesome. So Hicks is an elite play. If we get either Gardner or Tauchman into a good play, a good spot in the order, they would be good options as well. But I think if we're talking right now, definitively Hicks followed by the righties within this lineup. That is up the stacks. Let's talk about things to watch for tonight. I did not mention the Astros in the stacking section. I very well could have, and I think that you could justify it. And I think that the reason we can justify it is because we can actually afford them for once. They're facing Kendall Graveman, who is coming back from a long injury. But Graveman has apparently been pumping heat in the exhibitions, hitting like 96, 97. He used to be a guy who got a bunch of ground balls. So if he can hit 97 pretty regularly and get those ground balls, probably not a dude you want to stack against. So I am fine if you want to stack the Astros. But I am interested in what Graveman can do here. So I think the Astros will get bumped down a bit. I think I prefer the Yankees over them despite the right-handedness of their order. And I would prefer both the Mets and the Brewers as well. I mentioned stacking the Yankees, and I mentioned the Heat in Philadelphia for today. And I think that you can also stack the other side of that game with the Philadelphia Phillies because they're facing Jay Happ. And Happ struggled on the whole last year with a 4.91 ERA. Tried to tinker, tried to up his slider usage in the second half. And, that can be effective because sliders are generally pretty effective pitches. But he still struggled with righties. Happ allowed a lot of hard contact to righties in that time. His strikeout rate against them, 20%, with a 10% walk rate. And again, really good hitting weather for tonight in Philadelphia. So Andrew McCutchen, $2,800, batting leadoff. JT Realmuto, Rhys Hoskins, they're both righties and super easy to afford as well. Bryce Harper, I don't really care. He's a lefty. I think that's still fine as well. So anyone on this Phillies team definitely in play, but I want to gravitate towards the guys like Hoskins, like McCutchen, like Realmuto, who will bat from the right-hand side. Finally, I hate the park that they're in, but I do think you could give the Marlins consideration, especially if they keep the roof open down in Miami. So keep tabs. Keep searching for the Marlins park, see if they're going to have the roof open for tonight. Because if it's open, they're pretty intriguing. They're facing Asher Wojciechowski. Wojciechowski, a 4.92 ERA last year with a 4.82 skill interactive ERA. He did get some swings and misses, but he also allowed a ton of fly balls and enough hard contact for it to be a concern. So that's why I'm at least in on the Marlins. The Marlins, assuming they don't have additional guys test positive for COVID-19, because apparently that's a major concern for them. They're not getting back to Miami until today. There's some decent hitters here like Jonathan Villar, Corey Dickerson, Jesus Aguilar. So I'm not totally opposed if you need the salary savings, but you may not need to on this slate. But there's a situation where you're stacking Glasnow and want to get the Yankees. the Marlins could be a good stacking partner in that situation. I'd make sure you check out the cheaper Mets, check out the cheaper Brewers before you do that. But I do think that you could go to the Marlins if you are in a tough spot and need to save some salary for today. But again, we're going to find out a lot of things as we get closer to lock for tonight. So make sure, again, you check out today's stream at 4 p.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube and Twitch pages. Go there, ask me questions. If you have questions about my process and how I land on certain things, why in the world I'm recommending Adrian Hauser, whatever you may need to ask, hit me up there, 4 p.m. Eastern, FanDuel YouTube page and Twitch page. Make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube page. You can watch the solo shot there, get a little bit earlier each day, 9 a.m. Eastern, on the FanDuel YouTube page. And also, again, check out the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed for your PGA, NASCAR, MLB, NBA back this week with Tom Vecchio, the Daily ISO. So a lot of good stuff on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed as well. If you have questions for me before that 4 p.m. stream, hit me up on Twitter at JimSannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you as you try to navigate this really, really weird pitching slate for tonight. But I think we can get a good enough read where we can at least make semi-informed plays. I think that things could be okay tonight despite the murkiness. Best of luck to you. We'll talk to you again this afternoon. This has been the solo shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.